The first snow of the season dusted the narrow lanes of Arbat, turning the cobblestones into a soft white carpet. Outside, the city moved slowly, but inside school number 34, the chatter was loud, almost theatrical. Mikhail sat at his desk, leaning back with a grin that promised trouble. His hair, messy from the morning wind, framed a pair of eyes that seemed to sparkle whenever they caught someone's attention. And attention was what he lived for. From the first bell to the final whistle of the day, Mikhail was never silent. He interrupted lessons with exaggerated yawns, cracked jokes just loud enough for the class to hear, and raised his hand only to ask questions he already knew the answers to. Most found it amusing. Some, especially the teachers, found it exhausting. That Monday morning, the classroom hummed with the dull rhythm of mathematics. Outside, snowflakes tapped against the frosted windows. Inside, Mikhail's mind was racing. The usual antics no longer gave him the rush he craved. He needed something bigger. Something unforgettable. At the back of the room, his best friend Ivan caught his gaze. Ivan's eyebrows arched, silently asking, "What are you plotting this time?" Mikhail only smiled, the kind of smile that hinted at secrets. When the bell rang for lunch, Mikhail slipped away from the crowd. The corridors smelled faintly of old books and chalk dust. He made his way down the worn wooden stairs, each creak a small drumbeat for the idea forming in his mind. Outside, near the iron gates, a soft mewling sound drifted through the cold air. He paused, listening. There, huddled against a pile of snow, was a tiny gray kitten. Its fur was dusted with frost, and its wide eyes looked up at him as if begging to be rescued. Mikhail bent down, scooping the fragile creature into his hands. The kitten shivered, and he felt a sudden spark of inspiration. By the time he walked back into the building, the plan was fully formed. Tomorrow, during the morning lesson, every pair of eyes in the classroom would be on him. Not just for a joke or a clever remark, but for something no one would forget. He tucked the kitten inside his coat, feeling its heartbeat against his chest. A slow smile spread across his face as he imagined the scene. Tomorrow, Arbat school number 34 would remember his name. That night, Moscow lay silent under a blanket of snow. Street lamps cast pale halos over the empty pavements, and the distant hum of a tram echoed through the stillness. In his small bedroom overlooking the frozen courtyard, Mikhail sat cross-legged on his bed, the kitten curled in a woolen scarf beside him. He had already named it Pushka, after the old cannon near the Kremlin. It was small, quiet, and yet he imagined it could make the most dramatic entrance the school had ever seen. His plan unfolded in whispers to himself, each detail polished like the glass marbles he kept in a tin on his desk. The next morning's history lesson would be the stage. Mr. Kuznetsov, stern and predictable, never tolerated interruptions, which made it perfect. Mikhail imagined the gasp of the girls in the front row, the smothered laughter from the back, and the ripple of chaos that would follow once Pushka appeared. Yet as he stroked the kitten's tiny head, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. The creature was warm and fragile, its breath rising in faint clouds. It wasn't a toy. Still, the hunger for attention, for the rush of being at the center of it all, drowned the voice of caution. He placed Pushka gently into a cardboard box lined with an old scarf and tucked it under his desk. The plan was set. Tomorrow would not be just another cold day in Arbat. The next morning, the corridors buzzed with the smell of wet coats and fresh snow tracked in by boots. Mikhail arrived earlier than usual, his satchel swinging against his side, a careful rhythm hiding the fact that Pushka's box rested inside. Classmates greeted him with the usual nods and jokes, unaware of the secret he carried. Ivan spotted him by the lockers and raised an eyebrow. Mikhail simply tapped the satchel twice, a signal they both understood meant something was brewing. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and tea. The radiator hissed against the wall, releasing a dry warmth into the air. As students took their seats, Mikhail slid into his, placing the satchel at his feet. Beneath the wooden desk, he felt the faintest movement inside the box. The bell rang. Mr. Kuznetsov stepped in, his heavy coat draped over one arm, his face as unreadable as always. He began the lesson in his slow, deliberate voice, speaking about the Napoleonic Wars. Outside, snow fell thicker, blurring the shapes of the buildings across the street. Mikhail waited. The timing had to be perfect. Not too soon, or it would be brushed aside as a minor distraction. Not too late, or the lesson would end before the scene could play out. His heart pounded, a rhythm that seemed to match the hiss of the radiator. Pushka shifted again in the box. Mikhail leaned down, whispering a word of reassurance no one else could hear. Soon, very soon. Halfway through the lesson, Mikhail's fingers slipped under the desk and nudged the lid of the box open just a crack. A small, curious face appeared, whiskers twitching at the strange sense of paper, ink, and old wood. The kitten made a soft sound, almost too faint to notice. Almost. A girl in the row ahead glanced over her shoulder. Mikhail grinned, raising a finger to his lips. She turned back, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. But Pushka was restless. Perhaps the warmth of the classroom, the shifting shadows of moving feet, or simply the strange new world around it stirred an impatience. The kitten pushed against the lid, and Mikhail had to press it closed again, his pulse quickening. Mr. Kuznetsov droned on, unaware, though Ivan now watched from across the room with wide-eyed anticipation. Mikhail mouthed soon. Yet a faint sneeze from Pushka slipped into the air. A few students looked around, frowning. The teacher paused for a moment, eyes scanning the class, before resuming his monologue. The moment was coming. Mikhail could feel it. The thin line between order and chaos stretched so tight it could snap at any second. When the moment finally came, it happened faster than Mikhail expected. Mr. Kuznetsov turned to write on the blackboard, the chalk screeching faintly against the surface. Mikhail eased the lid open. Pushka leapt out, landing softly on the floor before darting between the rows of desks. A ripple of gasps and muffled laughter spread through the room. The kitten's small paws pattered on the wooden boards like hurried raindrops. A boy in the front row tried to scoop it up, only for Pushka to slip away, tail high and eyes bright with mischief. The class erupted into whispers and suppressed giggles. Mr. Kuznetsov turned. His gaze swept the room, cold and sharp, before landing on the darting gray shape near the window. His jaw tightened. "Whose is this?" His voice was low, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Mikhail's heart raced. This was the moment he had wanted, all eyes on him, the center of the storm. But as Pushka leapt onto the teacher's desk, scattering papers like startled birds, a different kind of tension filled the air. It was no longer just amusement. It was the start of something else. Pushka froze on the edge of the desk, his tiny claws gripping the wood. Mr. Kuznetsov's eyes narrowed. The room, moments ago alive with whispers, fell silent except for the kitten's faint mewl. Mikhail felt the weight of the teacher's stare, even though it wasn't aimed directly at him yet. He forced himself to stay still, as though by remaining motionless he could hide in plain sight. But Pushka had other plans. With a sudden burst, he leapt from the desk onto the windowsill, knocking over a mug of tea. The dark liquid spread across a stack of marked essays, curling the paper at the edges. Gasps rose from the class. Mr. Kuznetsov's voice, when it came, was measured. "Who brought this animal into my classroom?" No one spoke. Mikhail's pulse pounded in his ears. For a moment, he considered confessing, then Pushka slipped down from the windowsill and darted under the rows of desks. The chase began. 3 students reached down, trying to catch the kitten, but Pushka was quick, weaving between their hands. He shot under Ivan's desk, then past the radiator, his small paws tapping against the floorboards like distant footsteps in a narrow hall. The teacher moved slowly, scanning the room, but the students were no longer still. Some crouched low, some craned their necks, and all eyes tracked the gray blur moving through the shadows. Mikhail kept his gaze fixed ahead, but his leg trembled under the desk. Every movement Pushka made felt like a thread connecting them, and with each dart and turn, that thread pulled tighter. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, thickening until the street beyond was nothing more than a shifting white haze. Inside, the heat from the radiator made the air feel heavy, as though the walls themselves were leaning in, waiting to see what would happen next. Pushka darted towards the open classroom door. Mikhail's breath caught in his throat. If the kitten escaped into the corridor, it could vanish anywhere, and finding it again would be far harder. He moved before thinking, sliding out of his seat and into the aisle. The sudden movement caught the teacher's attention. "Mikhail, sit down." The command was firm, but he didn't stop. Pushka had already reached the doorway. With a quick lunge, Mikhail blocked the path, scooping the kitten into his arms. For a heartbeat, he held it close, its tiny heart hammering against his palm. The room was silent. All eyes were now fixed on him. There was no hiding now. Standing in the center of the aisle, Mikhail could feel the heat of the stairs on his back and the weight of Pushka in his arms. The kitten's tail flicked nervously, its head turning from side to side. Mr. Kuznetsov stepped forward, each footfall slow and deliberate. His shadows stretched long across the floor. "Bring it here," he said, his voice low but carrying through every corner of the room. Mikhail hesitated. The warmth of the kitten seeped through his coat sleeve. A dozen thoughts flickered through his mind. The laughter he had imagined, the triumph of attention, the sudden knot of unease now curling in his stomach. He walked forward, Pushka cradled in his hands. The teacher's eyes never left him. When Mikhail placed Pushka on the teacher's desk, the kitten shrank back from the unfamiliar scent. Mr. Kuznetsov looked at it for a long moment, then at Mikhail. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. "You will wait for me after class," the teacher said. His tone was calm, almost too calm. The words carried a weight that promised consequences beyond the moment. Mikhail returned to his seat, the heat of the radiator suddenly feeling stifling. Pushka sat quietly now, a small gray bundle against the dark surface of the desk, unaware of the tension it had caused. Outside, the snow continued to fall, swirling in the wind, covering the city in a fresh, cold layer. Inside, the lesson resumed, but no one truly listened. The air was different now, heavier, more brittle, as though the thin thread between mischief and trouble had finally snapped. And the day was far from over.